Yes. Okay, any questions on that much? Good. Right, and so you see now, I don't have VirtualBox guest editions sitting there on the desktop and so forth. So we should be good to go. Okay, I'm going to throw this into full screen mode. There it goes. Okay, let's talk about Linux stuff. So the good news is that actually this version of Kali, Kali 2, they have the big push in terms of development for Kali 2 has actually been UI. It's been usability stuff. Okay, so we've reached a point where our hacking with our hacking toolkit, what we are mainly concerned with in terms of development is how user-friendly it is. Okay. So that should basically give you an indication of kind of where we are in terms of dealing with tools and so forth. There's lots of graphical tools that you can use within Kali for hacking, right? I think I mentioned this in a previous class. You know, Kali gives your grandma the ability to pwn a server. Okay, there's lots of stuff there. Nevertheless, having a basic command of Linux command line is critical for a penetration tester. Okay, why? Well, I mean, the command line basically gives, one reason is the command line is the ultimate in terms of flexibility and configurability, right? Sometimes there are certain GUI tools that don't give us full access to all the stuff that we want to be able to do. In that case, yeah, you got to switch back down to the command line. A good example of this, not so much directly related to pen testing, but software development in general, is Git. Okay, Git is a revision control system, and actually, you know, it has a GUI that you download with it. Honestly, for probably 90 to 95% of what you want to do, you can do it in the GUI. Okay, and then there's that small little sections of things where, I got to actually go down to the command line to do it. Okay, but most of the time, I can live in the GUI. I'm happy. I don't have to worry about all of that stuff. Okay, the other reason, though, and probably even more important for us pen testers, of why we want to be comfortable with command line. Anybody? A lot of times, your first access into a system will be command line only. You're going to have to work to get graphical access to that system. And you're going to have to start from the command line. Okay? So, being comfortable in the command line is a good skill to develop. Okay, now again, I don't expect that you've come to this class being Linux experts and DOS experts, and no. I mean, we're going to see various commands and all of that. But again, part of that is, if this is something that you're going to go on as a career, I mean, these are kind of those skills that you want to continue to develop, because it is kind of critical, for poking around in systems and so forth. You do start with the command line, so you're just going to have to kind of get used to it. All right, so yeah, there's the terminal. Incidentally, so you might have seen me before. I keep making the font bigger. The way to do that is basically Control-Shift+. So that basically just makes the font larger for you, so you can kind of see all those things and everything. Yeah, again, and again, if you see me kind of do a little shortcut looking thing or something, you're like, wait, what did you just ask me? So anyways, let's take a look at a couple of things. So we talked first about ls, okay? So ls is, of course, one of the fundamental commands, basically getting a directory listing. There are a couple of flags on ls that you should absolutely be familiar with. One is the tac. So you'll see this single dash. A lot of times people will refer to this as tac, or you can just say dash, but ls-l, basically that gives you the long form listing. So that looks something like this, okay? So what is all this gobbledygook? Okay, so clearly we've got some dates and times in there, all right, so that's pretty cool. Notice, root. Why is it saying it twice? Pardon? Yes, right? So this first column is who the user is that owns that file. The second column is the group that is affiliated with that particular file. Okay, so in this case, both the root user and of course the root user is a member of the root group. That's why we're seeing the root and root. Okay. What's all this stuff over here? Anybody know that? Yeah, you know it all. Yeah, so this stuff here is Unix permissions, okay? Well, mostly. Notice that for all of these, we have a D. Anybody want to guess what D means? Not you. It's a directory, yeah, exactly. Basically, all of those are in fact directories. Okay, that's what the D is there. If I had a regular file, then I wouldn't have that. In fact, here's the other thing. There might actually be other stuff in this directory. See, by default, ls and even ls tac l doesn't show all of the stuff. If you want all of the stuff, you use tac a. And that includes, for instance, files and directories that begin with dot. Okay, so notice there's a file called, there's something called .bash history, bash rc, .cache, .config, etc. Okay, and I can combine those two. So ls tac a and l, and now we have both, right? So I have the long list form of the directory, and I'm seeing all of the content here. And now we can actually go through and look, and we say, oh, okay, look at, for instance, bash history. Notice no D there. That's a file. Right. Also, the fact that that my console has this nice highlighting going on, where directories are in this nice light blue versus files that are not. Again, that's great for when I'm logged into Kali. On the other hand, depending on how I actually am accessing and getting a command line look at an external system, I may or may not have that nice little highlighting. Okay. How about dot and dot dot? What are those? Those are special. Okay, hit them. So, dot means the current directory. Dot dot is the parent directory. So those two are kind of special. Okay. So we see our little column here for whether things are a directory or a file. Then let's talk about all these various R's, W's, X's, etc. Okay, so you'll notice that basically there are three sets of RWX's. Okay. In the same way that we have dealing with the user and the group, something similar is going on here. What we have is the first three are the user's permissions. Okay, so R stands for, cryptically enough, read. W stands for write, and X stands for executable. Okay. So the first three basically are permissions for the particular user that is listed. Okay. Generally speaking, for a directory to be able to sort of get a directory listing, you do need to have the X-bit having access, which is why you'll see, for instance, things like .cache and desktop, they have these X-bits set. I mean, they're not actually executables, but again, to get that directory listing, you need that. Okay. After the three parts for the user, what we have are the group permissions. Okay, so for instance, the .bash rc file, notice, is readable and writable by the user, but it is only readable by people in the group. Okay, I don't have a W, I don't have an X. This last set is everybody else. Okay, so we have the user's permissions, we have the group permissions, and then we have everybody else. Okay, and so that's how those things are set up. Okay, that's basically the meaning of those particular things. Now, okay, clear's really handy because it just, as you see, clears the screen. Let's just do that. If you want to know what your current directory is, you can use this, PWD. Think of it as print working directory. Right? And it shows me I'm in the directory /root. Okay? So, again, couple of differences between Linux and Windows, right? In Windows, where's your main drive? Yeah, it's C:, right? C:/, that's your main drive. That's sort of the. In fact, that is the root of your file structure for Windows. Okay. In Linux, the root of your file structure is /. And notice that Linux uses /, not /. Okay. So the root of your file system in Linux is /. Right? And then there's all the various directories and so forth. Okay. Now, most often, we happen to be in, since we're logged in as root, most often you typically will see things, you will see people in, for instance, a home directory. So there'll be sort of a home directory, and then the users will each have their own files listed there. So you'll oftentimes see that. In the case of root, we just happen to be at that location. Okay. Notice this one, CD tilde. Okay, what this basically says is change to my own home directory. Whatever user I'm logged in as, I want to change to my home directory. So just doing tilde by itself, that's going to take me back to /root. If I had other users on this system, I could change to their directory. So if I happen to have a user named Phil on this directory, I could use the shortcut CD tilde Phil to change to Phil's directory. Notice it says, I don't know, there's no such user, it doesn't exist, right? On the other hand, again, if I did, I could do CD tilde root, and then it takes me to my own home directory as well. So the shorter version of that is just to use the tilde key. Okay. Questions on that much? Okay, good. The philosophy in Linux, which is also sort of from Unix, is that basically what you should have is a collection of, in fact, probably a lot of commands that are simple, that are basically good at one and only one thing. And essentially, then you can assemble together more complex behavior by combining all of those various simple commands together. Okay. Now, one of the questions then is, well, all right, for a given command, how do I know how I can actually use it, right? Well, one way is RTFM, read the manual, right? And in Linux, there is this command, man, for manual. So you could do man and give it the name of a command, and it will basically tell you about all the ways of using that command, right? So notice it shows us a little synopsis, right? Tells us, okay, that lists directory, right? ls, give it the options, give it files, right? Tells us about all of the various options for it. Sometimes you'll actually notice there's a bunch there. I've only scratched the surface on ls. You'll also see, right, so there's additional documentation that you can go take a look at through that URL. Sometimes commands have actually an info page, so that's actually helpful. In fact, let's take a look at that. So I'll just I'm going to highlight that, hit Q to get out of my man page. I think if I remember right, it's right click. No, actually, it's the other one. Middle mouse button. Nope. Yeah. No. Thought it was middle mouse button. Unless it might be my mouse driver that's catching something. All right. Let's do info. Yeah. Oh, it's not finding info. Well, that's it. Okay. So info isn't installed, which I could install it. Yeah. There. Info is another way of viewing viewing documentation. A lot of times it has a bit more in terms of details and all of that. So info ls, yeah, there we go. Right. So notice this basically pops up all of this sort of stuff. Again, I can hit Q to get out of that. You'll notice too that. Right, it actually sort of has a little tutorial down at the bottom. So H for help, capital H for help, lowercase h for the tutorial. Right, so if you wanted to sort of know about more about using info and things like that. The other thing, most Linux commands will also have a help flag available for them as well. Does ls? No, it doesn't. Yes, but a lot of times what you'll see is you can do a -h, and that will actually give you help about a particular command. How about man? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so notice I did man-h, right, all the way up here. And you'll see we get usage. Okay, here's how you actually use man, and then here are various flags for using man, and basically gives you all that kind of good stuff. Okay. Of course, if you're confused about how to use man, you can look up the manual page for man. Man. Like so. One really helpful flag for man. Sometimes you will use man and you'll be looking for information about a particular command, and initially when you just put in the command it doesn't find it. What you can do is you can use the TAC-K option, which basically is a keyword search. So this will try to find all man pages that deal with the particular keyword. Yeah, notice there's lots of man pages that have the keyword man in them, and so we're seeing all of those. Okay. So knowing about where files are, locating getting directory listings. You'll notice that I was doing CDs for change directory, right? So again, PWD, I could also have done CD ... Remember, the ... is go to the parent directory, so that should actually take me to the root directory, namely /, which we actually see right there. It's shown right there. But again, I can also verify that by printing the current working directory. Okay. Okay. So, man is cool, ls is cool, all of those. Let's do a couple of other ones quick. You might want to create a directory for yourself, right? So what the command for that is mkdir, make directory, right? And I'll just create. A lot of time, you'll notice actually my directories that are listed here are all using an uppercase letter. It's a fairly common standard that people will use sometimes for creating their own directories. Basically that way, because then when you do a listing, you have sort of your directories appearing first before your files. So there it is. There's the delete me directory. Oops. So I could do del. The Linux command line has completion. So notice I'll do cd del. I hit tab and it sort of figures out that, oh, you probably want that. You can also do that for the names of commands. You can type the first couple of letters, you hit tab, and it'll expand those out, right? So here we are with that, and so forth. Okay, to get rid of a directory, that's rmdir. Okay, looks like that. Again, we can see that. Couple of other super handy commands. So, for instance, you'll notice I have these various files here. This bash history, bash rc, profile files, etc. Okay. First of all, if you come from Windows, how does Windows know the type of file it's dealing with? Even simpler. Yeah, the file extension, right? .exe, .txt, .jpeg, blah, 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 blah. Right? I don't have that here. Okay. And honestly, I mean, what would happen if I took, for instance, a JPEG file and just changed it to .txt? I mean, Windows wouldn't be able to open it by default, but that doesn't change the file itself, right? So there's a really handy command in Linux for finding out about a particular file, named, cryptically enough, file. So for instance, I can ask it about this bash rc file, right? And it says, oh, it's ASCII text. That is, it's a plain text file. That's all it is, right? Can I do directories? Yeah. Right? And it knows about all kinds of files, right? It knows about, it's able to determine not only if something is an executable, but sort of what kind of executable. So for instance, if I was dealing with a Windows executable versus a Linux executable and so forth. So it's really, really handy for, if you have this file and you're not quite sure what it is or how to deal with it and all that, use file on the file and that will actually tell you. For text files, there are a number of different things that we can do. Very commonly, you want to be able to view the contents of a text file. Now, one way of doing that is to use the cat command. Okay, and basically what cat does is it's going to take the entire contents of the file and just dump that directly to the screen. Right? So notice, I run that, and there's all my stuff, right? So I can go back through, say, yeah, okay. And yeah, there's kind of a lot of stuff in that. Now, if my file is really small, doing a quick cat on it is really nice, because then I just get the couple of lines and then I'm good. On the other hand, for something like this, where we see we have a lot more lines, generally we want some form of pager, okay? And so oftentimes you'll see people will use more. I tend to use less. Less is more. That's the way you remember that. Right? So if I use either less or more on the file, notice it actually shows me one screen worth of information, but then down here it's actually pausing for waiting for me to tell it to advance. So I can, for instance, hit enter or space, and that will basically allow me to see the next page and so forth. I can search. So we can do H for help, and that basically gives us all the various commands and so forth. And then when you're finally done looking at the file, you can basically just do a Q and you're done. Okay. So cat, really, really useful. Not only, as I said, for small files, but what we'll see later on is also we're going to use cat to grab things and sort of pipe that into to other things. Less is really handy, again, if you're dealing with sort of a larger file where you want to be able to view it one page at a time without having to manually sort of scroll yourself and so forth. Two other commands that are really handy for dealing with text files. Suppose I didn't really know much about the bash RC file, and I just kind of wanted to take a quick look at the first few lines. There. I can use the head command. Okay, so the head command gives me the first few lines of a file. There's also options for specifying how many lines you want and so forth. Okay, so it's really handy. I can see, oh, okay, right. So I can see the initial lines of this says, oh, okay, it's executed, blah 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 blah. Right. Sometimes we want the other side of the file, the end of the file. A good example are log files. Right? So the log files in Linux tend to be written linearly, and so the idea is if you wanted to kind of check the most recent entries in a log file, really all I'm interested in are the last few lines, not the first few lines. In that case, you want tail. There's the last few lines of our file. Okay, where are the logs? Right, var. Right, so if I go to the /var/log folder, I'll see actually a number of logs as well as directories where there will be logs for some of those other commands. The most common log is obviously our sys log, right? So if I take a look here, let me go. Var log, sys log, okay, and there we go. Okay, so we can actually see all the kind of stuff going on, right? So from September 23rd, 1517, kind of showing all of the stuff from startup going on, all kinds of stuff, and as you can see, this is not a short file. Okay. Again, typically, if something has errored out, something didn't work right, what you oftentimes want to then do is, well, just show me the last few things that happened. Oh, okay, that's what happened. All right. So again, different ways of viewing different files. Okay. Let's talk about finding stuff. Okay, so first of all, there is a command called locate. Okay, so notice, locate, find files by name. So locate reads one or more databases prepared by the update database commands, and then writes file names matching at least one of those patterns, and so forth. Okay, so since we've just done an install, we might want to make sure that our that the database is in fact up to date, and so I can do that. I can run the update database command, and it'll make sure that everything's up to date. Okay, so now that I have that, suppose I want to locate a particular file. Right? I happen to know that somewhere in Kali Linux there's a utility named SBD. In fact, it's named sbd.exe. Okay? So I can ask locate to try to find that for me. Right? And sure enough, notice, it finds it in /user/share/Windows binaries, right? Also, there's a copy in Windows binaries backdoors. Basically, it seems to indicate that that is a Windows binary. Let's check. File, user, share, Windows binaries, SBD. Yes, it's a PE2 32 executable console Intel, so it's a 32-bit Windows executable file. Yeah. Okay. Now, I can't directly run that on Kali. Notice. Says no, because in case you didn't know, files compiled for Windows don't run under Linux, and vice versa. However, there is this program. Anybody heard of Wine? I mean, the Linux Wine. I assume you've heard of Wine. Yes, I know. So, what Wine is an environment to allow you to run Windows programs within Linux. Okay? Now, it doesn't work for everything, but it works really good for like command line tools and those kinds of things. So, for instance, if I did want to run this thing, right, and then I can give it its commands, right? And yeah, notice it's actually kind of, well, it's doing something. Let's see. Oh, it looks like it's actually, it was smart enough to kind of figure out that I was trying to, let's see. Well, bad exe for wait, Z, looks like Wine 30, looks like Wine 32 is missing. Yeah, so it actually figured out that I need to install some other stuff. All right. We'll get to that on another day. But basically, you can run Windows executables on your Kali machine. Okay. Why the hell would you want to do that? What's that? Proprietary, sure. Also, and this is one of the things that we're going to do in this class, suppose that I was working on a hacked version of a command that maybe has a backdoor. So, based on reconnaissance, I'm going to find out that, oh, my target, let's say they're running Windows 7 Service Patch 1, right? And so then based on that, looking at various online databases and so forth, I know the vulnerabilities that occur in that. I can set up, for instance, a test environment for Windows Server, Windows 7 SP1. But the thing is, too, I can actually write programs under Kali, cross-compile them, that is, take the program that I've written on Kali and create not a Linux executable, but a Windows executable. And then I could even test it right from within Kali. Okay? And we'll see kind of those various things and so forth. Actually, and just to kind of share this with you, right? So recently in my data structures class, I think there might be a couple people in this. In the data structures class, they're working on a project, and I wanted to provide them with a demo of the solution, and it's in C++. So I sat down and I went to compile it, and then I went to try to share that executable, and I realized there were a bunch of DLLs that needed and stuff. So I wanted to create just an executable by itself, referred to as static linking. So I'm following all the directions for doing that using the Windows environment that I had, and no matter what I did, it would not work. I couldn't get the damn executable to actually be standalone, and I was really frustrated by this. So finally, I got so ticked off, I couldn't find the answer, and I really wanted to get this executable out. So I fired up Linux. I cross-compiled it in Linux as a statically linked file, and now that's actually what they're running. So cool. All right. 2 minutes. Okay. Good, enough time to talk about the two other searching commands, okay? So the two others, so locate's great, especially for those things that are typically installed by various compilers that are actually, or I'm sorry, by the various packages and so forth, that essentially are known in that database, right? Remember, we talked about the fact that locate uses the database, okay? But what about other stuff, okay? So for instance, right, when I tried to run wine, you'll notice that command ran. If I want to know where that command is, or any particular command that I'm going to run, I can use the which command, right? And so it will show me, oh, that's in user bin, right? And I could do, you know, which Python, yeah, there, right? And that says, oh, okay, that one's in user bin as well. Yeah, it turns out they're both in user bin. There's various other ones as well. Okay, so you'll notice we can kind of figure out which particular command we're using in terms of where it lives. Okay, if all of that fails, then you use find. So, for instance, I could say find. So now I'm up in the overall root, and I could say, okay, I'm going to search from the root, and I'm going to search for a file with the name sbdexe, right? Like so. And now, really? Or not? I think it's just that. Yeah. Good. And now it's literally searching the entire contents of the Linux hard drive. Okay? So it's looking for a file named that. And you can use pattern matching and various other things in there as well. Okay? Again, not only is it handy for using on Kali, but think about things like, for instance, that, oh, I'm now in some Linux server and I'm looking for a file named, you know, name with password in the name, or etc. Okay. All right. So that's it for today. I'll see you guys next time.